Greetings everyone, I'm your Lahu for these sessions, and I am imparting a sort of wisdom of the old ways, which in the old language was called Fern Sayan, from Fern meaning old, ancient, and Sayan, wisdom, teachings, which also means to say in the old English language. So I'm going to just, because I've only got to keep this video under 10 minutes, I'm going to move a little bit away from the usual teachings and speak a little bit about the way things are at the moment regarding politics and the idea of religion. This is more of a philosophy than a religion, as I regard it, the philosophy of the Wyrd or Wyrdism. But what I do see in religion a lot, like as the actual organised forms of religion, is I suppose a mix of a lot of wisdom and understanding and also a lot of intolerance. Now, before the whole thing with, the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter thing started up, there was, as you may remember, a video taken of a group of Catholic youths in America who had been basically sent out by their school to protest against abortion and other things like that outside the Lincoln Memorial. At the end of it, they were then suddenly joined by one of the extreme sort of religio-political movements, which is called the Black Hebrew Israelites on one side, and then on the other hand, on the other side, was a group of First Nation people, led by an elder called Mr. Phillips, something like that, protesting against the building of a proposed wall on Native American land there. All valid protests, I suppose, whatever you believe, whatever you choose to believe, whatever, maybe you're fighting for certain rights, things like that, I don't know, or maybe just fighting for more recognition, all good. Where things got disturbing was when the Israelite group started to racially harass the Native Americans. No one bats an eyelid. They then see the Catholic schoolboys, most of whom were white, and basically started to racially abuse them, calling them inbreds, stuff like that. All pretty disgusting stuff, has to be said. Anyway, the elder tries to go in with his drum, tries to calm things. All this is caught on video. But then the crowd start doing mohawk chops, which could have been for any reason. Maybe they're just having a bit of a piss take. I think at one point they started to shout "build this," as in build the wall. This obviously enraged the First Nation protesters, who came right up to them and started to do the whole thing. How dare you test to come out of the States? This is where we were first. Why don't you go back to Europe? All that kind of stuff. Childish. It's like childish playground stuff, really. And one thing leads to another. The whole thing's finally dispersed. And then videos are posted online of the whole thing, heavily edited though, and very biased against the Catholic school kids. I mean, the one who everyone was focused on, you know, the kid in the MAGA hat, he make America great again, the red cap, he may even wearing that for whatever reason, we don't know exactly, he might have just thought it was a funny stunt. You know, there were kids who go to a usually quite strict school, they were just happy to be free, and when people, you know, are pleased for a bit of freedom from school, like if they do and say stupid things, you know, at the end of the day, these are a bunch of 16-year-old teenage kids, you know. Not a lot of people were seeing it from that point of view, but somehow they got used as pawns in a very politicised debate, very complex, very kind of, you know, the divisions between black and white in America, and yet somehow it led to just all a slandering of what were basically kids who had very little understanding of the world outside their doorstep. And this was what I thought was quite disturbing. You know, everyone else protesting there decided to turn the whole thing against them, accusing them of things they hadn't even really done exactly or said. Now, I'm no real fan, as someone who, aside from trying to, you know, kickstart a revival of my culture's ways, and traditions from before Christianity, I can't say I'm any fan of Catholicism exactly. But I thought it was odd that so much hatred and bile in the media was being directed at these kids. It was the TV networks, the papers, and most of all, it was completely online. And it was found, anyway, the longer video revealed that everything that the kid leading the group had been saying was very much true, and the elder Mr. Phillips had basically been lying through gritted teeth, basically, about the whole event. You know, the whole thing got pretty nasty, let's say, put this to least. Even when this was found to be true, and the kid had rightfully sued some of the TV people, you know, for basically media harassment of what were a bunch of kids, basically. And there was just so much hatred, this idea that, well, he was rich already, he had all this money, he didn't need all that money. Just absolute hatred of the fact that he'd been proved right, simply because of what he stood for. And I found myself thinking, this isn't just a black versus white, and, you know, white gated picket fenced society versus everybody else, the poor, the interracial, the downtrodden, all that. And I started to realise that if this was the sort of intolerance I was seeing, then this was surely something deeper than this. This was more like the opening of old wounds between Catholic America and non-Catholic America. Now, a lot of people don't realise this, but there was a time when Catholics were actually a persecuted minority in America, and they were treated in ways very similar to Jewish people in America, and indeed the rest of the Western world. As surprising as may seem, because the first people before them there were Protestants, and then the Catholic people came along, and Protestants were like furious that, like, you know, Protestant Irish people were going along, and there was very real hatred, you know, on a par with like racism and anti-Semitism. And even after Catholics had fought for American independence on the American Civil War, not a lot of that feeling towards them ebbed away after America won independence. In fact, Catholics found themselves ghettoized in pogroms in America. and ever since, you know, throughout the period of the 1800s, I found much of the 20th century, Catholics were just doing everything they could, really, to try and get on with everyone else in the United States. I'd say they very much knew what it was like to be a Jewish person, say, experiencing anti-Semitism, because they were experiencing anti-Catholicism. They did everything. They became more strict in their way of practicing their faith. And eventually, as the 80s came around and the place became increasingly pushing more and more towards increasing modernism and leading the way in modernism, in the future, both Catholicism and Protestantism in America and other religions just became very, very sort of, Bible Belt type strict. And conservative, and ever since then it was like, well, it doesn't matter anymore. Hey, it doesn't matter if you're Catholic, it doesn't matter if you're Protestant. It's all kind of Christian against secularism. But now we're entering a stage where political correctness has got so extreme that you can't be any of these other things. Can't be this, can't be that, can't be transphobic, can't be da-da-da-da. Which is all good, of course. But if you don't feel like being particularly tolerant, it's like, where's this going to go? And I think this is a very early sign that we're entering an age in which those old wounds are going to be opening and anti-Catholicism will start again. Those kids, they really were just kids. And yet, I believe what they faced that day, despite their own bad behaviour, admittedly, 16-year-old kids, I remember what it was like being at school when I was at 16. A lot of us really were idiots, basically. But you grow up, you become wise. Basically, that whole event outside the Lincoln Memorial, as well as the racism against the Native Americans, I also believe that the people caught right in the middle of it, those school kids, I believe they were victims of anti-Catholicism, and I believe that is starting to rise up again in the United States. And I think it's like, wherever your path is, let's all sit down, talk to each other, and understand that we all have very different ways of doing things, but we can learn to understand each other. Where's Dale?